In the near future, a satellite capsule known as Pilgrim is returning from Mars with soil samples that could potentially confirm the existence of alien life. Unfortunately, the Pilgrim gets damaged by asteroids and ends up veering off course. Now, the crew of the International Space Station must intercept the Pilgrim and retrieve the sample. After helping Rory suit up for a spacewalk, the rest of the crew rushes to their places to assist Rory in navigating through the rescue. Rory floats outside to reach the station's mechanical arm and guides it to catch the Pilgrim, which suddenly comes at great speed and causes the whole station to shake when they make contact. For a moment, the crew worries something went wrong, but Rory reveals he successfully caught the Pilgrim. Afterward, paralytic astrobiologist Hugh carefully begins testing the sample and is pleased to discover an almost fossilized single-cell organism in the soil. He tries to reanimate the organism, but there's no reaction, so he decides to mimic the atmosphere from Proterozoic Earth by adding a growth hormone. This time, it does work, and the organism starts moving, so the crew celebrates having found the first proof of life beyond Earth. Soon, the news outlets on Earth are covering this amazing discovery, so the crew appears on TV to show their work in the station and how everything works for kids to learn, including explaining how astronauts go to the bathroom. A particular school has been given the honor to choose a name for the organism, and the kids decide to name it Calvin, which is celebrated by a huge crowd on the streets. Sometime later, Dr. Miranda checks on David's health as she expresses her concerns because David has been in the station for 473 days, which will soon become a new record. His atrophy has accelerated, and he's close to his radiation limit, but David doesn't care. After having been in the military and fought in the war, David prefers to be up here where people aren't nasty to each other. The next day, Hugh discovers Calvin has grown very quickly and now consists of hundreds of cells that are developing a neural network. Each of these cells can perform functions independently, which means each cell is simultaneously a muscle cell, a nerve cell, and a photoreceptive cell. Commander Cat describes Calvin as being all brain, all muscle, and all eyes. Hugh notices that Calvin is developing appendages, so he tries to make contact, which successfully causes the cells to move and take interesting shapes. Later, while the crew has dinner, Engineer Show gets to watch a live stream of his wife giving birth and meets his newborn daughter. The crew congratulates him, and Cat gifts him a book so he can do story time through video calls. After dinner, David uses special software to check his body for any potential body problems, and Hugh checks on Calvin again. The little guy is small but has a proper body now and climbs Hugh's finger. A few weeks later, the crew is shocked to suddenly hear an alarm coming from the lab. Rory rushes inside and quickly takes care of the malfunction, but Miranda doesn't understand how it could happen. Hugh thinks he must have overseen something, so Rory and Miranda immediately scold him, reminding him to be careful because they don't know what they're dealing with. After a few more days pass, Calvin has become completely inactive, and they think it may have gone into hibernation after the change of air pressure caused by the malfunction. Miranda is relieved to see this because Calvin had been growing too fast for her liking. While Calvin is inactive, the crew uses the chance to reinforce the security in the lab, making sure it's sealed off at all times. Later, while Miranda is checking on Hugh's legs, he confesses he feels guilty over his mistake, possibly having caused this on Calvin. After they discuss some options, Hugh decides to stimulate Calvin with a very low voltage of electricity to see if he'll wake up. The first few tries don't work, but suddenly Calvin jumps awake and clings to Hugh's hand as it breaks the electric wand. Hugh tries pulling his hand out of the box, but Calvin is incredibly strong for such a tiny thing, and the lower half of its body is clinging to the box for extra leverage. Offering the wand again doesn't distract it either, and at that moment, Calvin starts squeezing so hard that Hugh's hand breaks into disturbing shapes. The crew wants to enter the lab to help, but Miranda refuses because it would put them in danger too. Suddenly, Hugh's head hits the box, and he passes out as Calvin finally lets go of him, so the crew can see how messy his hand is now. Then, Calvin tests the glove and can tell it can't break it, so it grabs the electric wand and uses it to pierce the glove, allowing it. The crew agrees and they retreat to a capsule, sealing themselves off before expelling the oxygen from the rest of the station. While they work on adding extra layers of sealing, Hugh is startled by something in the shadows and starts feeling unwell. Miranda tries checking on him, but he swears he's fine. For the next few hours, the crew can only wait around. They grieve for their lost friends and Hugh blames himself for what happened, but David says it was a team decision to take Calvin. Then Hugh points out that Calvin is just a creature trying to survive and to do so it must feed. At that moment Hugh passes out and the computers indicate his vitals are dropping, so the others rush to stabilize it. While using the defibrillator, they notice something moving on Hugh's leg. They unzip the suit and immediately jump back to discover Calvin feeding on the leg. Hugh never felt it because of his condition. Miranda tries using the defibrillator to shock Calvin, but this only makes the alien float up and show how much its body has evolved. The crew immediately rushes out and accidentally splits up, so Sho has to hide inside a sleeping pod before Calvin can catch him. The creature tightly grabs the pod and tries to break it, but it soon grows bored and goes away. Meanwhile, David and Miranda return to Hugh, who doesn't have much time left. He asks his friends to lift him so he can feel what floating is like one last time, and then he dies. While the duo grieves, they see a beeping light on the screen and realize that Calvin accidentally swallowed Hugh's tracker, so now they can follow its position and make a plan. Calvin moves around all over the station and eventually makes it back to Hugh, but while it is devouring the body, it realizes it's a trap right before David and Miranda close the door to lock it inside. Then they purge the oxygen out of that room to try to suffocate it, which may take a while. At that moment, the computer announces a shuttle is approaching them, and David realizes Kat's message did reach Earth. However, the shuttle doesn't get in contact with them, instead it starts hitting the station. Miranda reveals that this is the last emergency firewall. The shuttle isn't here to save them, it's come to push them into deep space so Calvin can't reach Earth. In the sleeping chamber, Sho also hears the announcement and thinks they're being rescued, so he gets out of the pod and leaves the hatch open behind him as he enters the docking area to reach the shuttle. Miranda and David rush to try to warn him of the truth, but it's too late. Calvin sneaks behind Sho as he opens the hatch. With the shuttle leaving, the open hatch causes the station to start decompressing and sucking Sho out while Calvin climbs his leg. Miranda grabs Sho's hand and tries to bring him back in, but Calvin continues to climb and reaches Sho's arm, so he lets go of Miranda to stop Calvin from returning inside. Then Sho gets sucked into space, but once again Calvin manages to cling to the station. It tries to grab onto Miranda next, but she shocks it with a tool to push it away and joins David to make their way back inside, closing the door behind them. When they look out the window, they discover the station is falling apart and the breaking parts are crashing against each other for further destruction. Next, David checks the computer and discovers they're losing life support, not to mention temperature and oxygen are dropping fast. He also notices that all this destructive chaos has pushed the station into Earth, so they have about 30 minutes before they re-enter the atmosphere. Unfortunately, there's no way they can survive re-entry, and they can't reach the escape pods without Calvin attacking them. As the duo comes to terms with their destiny and deals with the cold, they find the book they bought for Sho's daughter, so David decides to read it. When he says goodbye, air, he gets an idea. Since Calvin is searching for oxygen, they could lure it into an escape pod using oxygen candles. David wants to launch himself with Calvin into deep space, which would give Miranda the chance to reach a different pod and land on Earth safely. Miranda doesn't like the idea of a sacrifice, but David reminds her he's a pilot and that he prefers space over Earth. After they both suit up, David goes out on the corridors and begins dropping oxygen candles as he makes his way to the escape pod. Calvin soon shows up and jumps from candle to candle as he follows David, who quickly reaches the pod. As soon as he gets inside, Calvin jumps on him to hug him tightly, so David distracts him with another candle and closes the pod hatch. Miranda notices this and immediately rushes out to reach the other pod. The capsules soon disconnect from the station and fly away, however the debris hits them both and causes them to start malfunctioning.